So sustainable development to me, I really like the simplicity of the Brundtland definition around development that meets the needs of the present while not compromising future and future generations. But I think sometimes what we lose in definitions is what makes them real. So for me it's about everything from the individual all the way through to the system and the institutions that we have within our human and ecological system. So it's really about respect for those individuals and those systems and building strength and integrity in them, respecting human rights, respecting the environment, and also bringing a way of being to how we work and how we relate to each other that respects equity and inclusion.
I think for me it's about inspiring and bringing together a narrative for the world where every person can live up to their potential. So I think it means different things in different contexts, but it's that sort of binding narrative.
Sustainable development is, like you say, a huge issue and a huge concept. But at the end of the day, it's about breaking it down into smaller workable chunks. So sustainable development covers every sector of every part of every economy. So I think it's working out how it fits within those.
Sustainable development, I think, is the art of moving forward socially and economically within system boundaries, so within Earth system limits, within social limits.
Sustainable development is about preparing our present society to deal with future. So it would be economic, social and environmental factors that need to be considered while we are developing our society and trying to progress and grow our society. And a big factor for me is a focus on the environment and how we are going to equip ourselves as a society to deal with the problems that are defining our generation. And I think it's particularly important for youth to be involved in sustainable development and how that they can get involved in creating a society that is not too dependent on not exploiting the resources that we currently have. So we need to be considering environment in every facet of our society, and we need to be considering it in any economic discussions, societal discussions, cultural discussions to ensure that we have a brighter future for all.
When I think of sustainable development, I, like so many of my colleagues, get to be nice and wavy about that term because as practitioners we're not required to lock it down precisely, but I like to think of it as the cumulative and collective efforts that we make to leave the world at least as plentiful and bountiful as it was when we found it. And we do that in a kind of social, economic and environmental triad of power. But to that, I think for my own sense of what sustainable development is, I've always really thought critically about where cultural sustainability fits within that picture and whether or not that's something that I see as a fourth pillar of sustainability, so sitting alongside social, economic and environmental issues to have a kind of productive output, or something that works to join those three things together, or something that actually underpins the meaning for sustainable development at all. I would say that for me, one of the things that I notice particularly about my lens on sustainable development is that it's always passed through the questions of culture. And I see that both in the positive sense of culture, but also probably also in a critical sense around race.
I think that often development traditionally has referred to, at least what I used to think of, I guess often a bunch of older white guys sitting around in developed countries making decisions about what the standard of development is, how we need to develop further in our own society, and then of course set a particular standard for less developed nations. I actually think that development and sustainable development goes far beyond just economics and infrastructure, but also includes our social and ethical development as a species, really. So, yeah, I think it encompasses far more than just that.
For me personally, I would have to argue that sustainability is about a much more democratic and inclusive way of including people in discussions about things that are going to influence them, and to move away from these broad overarching capitalist, imperialist ways that development goes on that excludes and silences whole groups of people, or those groups of people are labelled as shit stirrers or troublemakers, or you don't really know how this is going to be good for you.
The effects are felt differently all over the world. So Indigenous communities that are living closely off the land, they're affected, I think, first and foremost. And we might not see it living in, say, the Melbourne CBD. We don't see it as much, but it still affects us. And the level of pollution in the air and how businesses are developing, whether they're developing sustainably, whether they're drilling oil or if we're turning to more renewable sources of energy, these impact every single person on this earth. And so we all have a role to play. And we owe this not only to the land, but to future generations. So the ramifications of not addressing sustainable development for the future are quite dire. It's quite serious, and it's something that we all need to be actively involved in. And it's something that parents need to be teaching their children from a young age, and it's something that every person needs to be included in. So we need to make sure that our sustainable development goals are very inclusive for women, children, villages, Indigenous communities. Everybody needs to be included.
If you consider for a moment the opposite case, unsustainable development, you might have business models that rely on inputs that they don't pay for, or they create outputs they don't pay for. They come at some social cost. These sorts of things are eventually going to run out of steam. And so you need business models that are built around a balance where they either don't take or they put back as much as they take out. The longer you operate the former, the more you move into the area of intergenerational theft. That you will increase the pie today in a way that has to be paid for by future generations in one way or another, be that financially or certainly be it through the inability to sustain the standard of living, if you like, that we might have achieved.